All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well. This is our next lecture discussion topic in Intro to Black World Studies. We're looking at cosmologies. In the title, I kind of specified the Bakongo for West Central Africa and two West Africa examples, but that in no way limits sort of the places and spaces we want to think about what we consider this. If anything, these are sort of really good examples to consider, and also too, if you think about something like demographics, West and West Central Africa play a pretty important role, in terms of number of arrivals, to the Americas. So that kind of thing. All right, so we're going to look at those three, but also too, we'll be thinking about it in this sort of broader sense of cosmology. And what do we mean, by the way, by cosmology? Let me just sort of get us in that space a bit more. I mean, you're looking at these images, you see sort of these sort of very much clear sort of ideations of African sort of presences or examples of spiritualness, right? And noticeably, there's no Islam or there's no Christianity, which both have early footprints in Africa. Looking at the traditional systems, right? Spirit practice and other forms, and maybe what role they might play in the sort of cultural ideations and manifestations of identity and expressions of culture amongst its antecedents, or these people who come as what we call, the legacies of the diaspora. So that kind of a thing. So think of cosmology as that component of spiritness, right? I always would use the analogy, for instance, of something like how do different groups specify the stars? The Greeks may know them as part of what have you, the well-known sorts of names, Orion's belt and this thing. But do the Africans call Orion's belt? Right? I mean, they have a different name for those stars. Right. So these kinds of things, all of these different cultures, probably the ones that are looking to the heavens and recording and thinking about it and integrating it in a belief system, bring this space. So it is about what one's place is within the universe, how one sees oneself within the universal space. So if you Google cosmology, you might get something, sort of to that effect. But in our sort of understanding, it's about what people know of themselves and bring as part of their experience, right? How do they practice tradition? How do they practice culture, right? What goes into the sort of ideations of things like food ways? I mean, even, dance tradition. What goes into that? What's in the mindset? What spirit ideas are being professed through those practices, right? So that kind of thing. And how do they play out, even as adaptive and transformed as they become? How will they play out in the Americas? Do we see the traces of them, validity of them in the Americas? That's also sort of the kind of question we want to be asking ourselves throughout this, right? So just some examples, and we may look at this more in class depending on folks' level of engagement with some of this material. You can also explore and expand on any of this kind of stuff. But West Central Africa, right? Just giving some basic ideas of one of the major cultures in West Central Africa, in the Congo region, called the Bakongo people. There are other groups, right? What are some sort of basic elements of their belief system, right? A central god, this sort of Nzambe Mpungu, right? Mackenzie, the sacred medicines, right? This practice of acknowledging elders as features of ancestral wisdom, both as good and negative, for guidance and for witchcraft, right? And then this one, and this is one maybe I want you to sort of keep in mind, Malewa or Malaya, right? One who has or made a breathing power within. How will something like that, as a belief system or spirit practice, make its way to the Americas? This is what we want to start thinking about, right? And so this is a heavy sort of hit if you want to think about it in the context of our perceptions and viewings and knowledges and knowings of self and inner self, and then this cosmological self, if you want to call it that, right? Energy coming from human beings, planetary living energy, cosmic living energy. This belief in this, right? And it certainly is manifested in Mbanza Congo, right? This idealized capital city governed by this strong chief who has supernatural power, but assures every citizen his or her due. It's so interesting. There's such a compelling moment in Congolese history when a great king is assassinated in front of many, many people. And it is as if some element of spirit is gone, is taken from the people, even in the very accounts of it. You get that sort of gasp of people of the taking away of something from in that moment, right? Yeah, but this Mabanza Congo, this belief, this leader who has this sort of ability to assure citizens their rights, right? I mean, you notice it isn't something like this king who says let's go vanquish everyone or this kind of thing, but it's about a stable and a coexisting environment, right? This kind of thing. I think that's important too. Another feature that you're going to want to remember in the Americas, the Yoa cross, right? How does that work, right? Called the simplified wheel of the world, right? We'll look at it from a couple different sort of lenses, sort of a couple different viewpoints to sort of get at or make sense of this cosmograph. But if you've ever heard, I'll just give you one example of how this thing will come up into the Americas, right? Think about Robert Johnson's crossroad. That's just a starting point. That's one of the things. We'll even spend some time unpacking that in class. How would something like that crossroad have a play, right? Not, some of you guys who are the readers are saying, no, this is false. It's the false, it's the devil meets this thing and all this. No, it is no. I mean, you could say that it figures into the process, but if you think about the legacy and the ideations of the folks coming from large numbers into the southeast part of the United States, right? That's one thing that really has to sort of figure here, right? When you start thinking about what could be at work and the spirituality and the manifestation of the music tradition, the dance tradition, other things, right? That may suggest, this crossroad is something else. It's a crossroad maybe, but it's also too this sort of simplified wheel of the world. It's this Yoa. It's this space of oath making. It's this spiritual boundary. It's this space of communication. We'll look at that some more. But maybe just using that Robert Johnson example, and I don't want to make that seem like that's the most linear way that it works, but maybe just as a way to sort of get you grapple with this, that might be something to sort of keep in your mind, right? And in West Central Africa, around this Bakongo culture, going back to some early social traditions, they believed that power came from this sort of sacred stone that was way in the interior, right? Called this the sacred or spherical stone of the Oracle of the Sunzi. Wow, sorry about that. Up in the Kambangu Mountains, and it's way deep. We maybe we'll got a map again. I mean, I'm going to respond to you all's interest and engagement with maybe some of these things that we discussed in the lecture. But like you could look and see it's very way far. I mean, it's deep in the interior. It's some maybe almost 1,000 kilometers away. And then you get some people found this rock, realized it was special and had spiritual power, and then it had its presence and meaning of all that made its way all the way down to the coast, where the huge Congolese, Mabanza Congo, the Congo state existed, right? And we'll see some aspects of that when we look at the Gates little short Africa clip there. We'll be able to see, oh, this is what we're talking about when you say when we mean Congo, this kind of thing, this Congo empire, right? West Central Africa, right? But folks all the way on at that coastal state, and those coastal states, and there were several, it wasn't just Congo, there are other ones that also had some in the region, Angola and Angola state, right? And I'm saying the name of Ndongo is actually, that's right. So there are other folks in the region who also will be pivotal, but they're interactive with this culture, right? And also too, they're interactive too with the Christians when they're going to show up. When the Catholics show up, they become very interactive with this as well, right? And Congo is an empire that's in existence, and when the Portuguese arrive, when the Dutch will arrive, when the English will arrive, right? But they brought this stone. They had this stone had real value, even up until the moments. But we'll talk about what happens with this here momentarily. But the stone had this real value, right? I mean, imagine finding something up amongst the mountains there. It would be a solid black stone, as it was described, I think, and that's in Thornton's or some other folks' account. Very shiny, had been smoothed over for thousands of years, millennia, probably just by the water rushing over, and was a volcanic rock. So someone comes upon this rock amongst all the other rocks, this shiny, smooth black rock, and everybody like, yeah, what's this? Of course, and picks it up, and then it becomes this very valuable sort of thing. With this sort of emanations of its power. I mean, because people go and consult to this stone and then come back and talk about it in places like the Congo, and I might be describing this incorrectly because I don't believe I believe they bring it closer after it's actually initially identified. But that's getting sort of deeper into this than maybe we want to go. But just thinking about these sort of features of cosmological belief, right? And this sets up another thing, and I am moving very quickly in and around some of this to tell this story. And again, we can unpack it further as you guys would like to do. Think about all of this around the figure of Dona Kempavita around the late, 17th century into the early part of the 18th century. She dies in 1706, right at the beginning of the 18th century, right? She's this what you would call an Nganga Marinda, right? She's trained to be a spiritualist in the context of all these sort of prior sorts of notions that we've talked about, cosmological structures and systems here a little bit, just a little bit. She's trained as an Nganga Marinda, right? A spiritualist whose sole sort of focus is to confront and resolve community-based issues, right? She's also, of course, looking at the time that she's alive, and she's around when the Portuguese and the priests from the Vatican and other folks are showing up in mass in big numbers. Initially engaged in real trade, and I think building even sort of business connections and sort of internetworks. It very quickly will become people, sadly, because you have people on both sides who will facilitate that. But it doesn't grow. I mean, it takes a little while. It's going to take a little while. It doesn't just all of a sudden tomorrow 1 million people don't leave the country, right? All this stuff plays out. You got to kill the spirit of the people. Again, this is why the example of some of this we describe here is so relevant, right? So at any rate, Dona Kempavita, you can see it by her name, she takes on that Dona, and it has sort of value or validity for folks, even in West Central Africa, in the context of the interactions with folks who profess the Catholic belief system, right? So that's at work in her sort of cosmology herself, right? Within the sort of a spiritualist on one hand, two on another hand, someone who interacts with Franciscan sort of missionaries to great degree. This is why we know, because we have this account, so we know, right? Leading up to this, she had already been interactive with these folks, right? But she had this sort of two lenses of this, so she could really sort of speak to what was going on. And you can imagine folks didn't like that very much, especially because she was very critical of the fact of the growing export of people out of the country, which was beginning to take shape, right? But one of the things that was a part of the process, I mentioned the assassination of a great king in that moment, right? There's a film clip, if I can find it, I'll pull it up. We can see how it's described, because it's such an awesome account there, right? Let me write that down. But you just you get to see this person who, in the midst of everything else, she's trying to hold on to this empire that's starting to fracture because of everything that's going on. And one of the spiritual components that holds the empire together is the Lisunzi stone. And so, of course, you can imagine what that's going to mean, right? The Catholics, I mean, well, you look at it like this. I mean, maybe we're more progressive now, maybe you want to say in terms of belief system. But I think if someone brought a slick, shiny black stone into a church and said, "Hey, this is the new this is the oracle of the Lisunzi stone," and brought it in, people would probably, we could, how do you think folks would respond into the spaces of all of the three major religions? In response to that sort of interactive, but they would I mean, there might be some problems there, and in the context of what's happened, this sort of slowly but surely project of sort of introducing Catholicism, and at the same time invalidating local belief, right? And so that's more and more, and as you can do that, you can really start to begin to have a stronger political sort of impact on the breakdown of the empire in those moments in the latter 17th and the early part of the 18th century in West Central Africa amid the slave trade. Now that's really picked up since the early sort of first centuries or so, when of course the Vatican and the Portuguese had this contact. Right? It takes a while. And I just want to stress that. I know I mentioned it before, but it's worth noting, right? But again, so how are they going to see this stone? Well, you can see from the account that you probably looked at there. The Oracle of Lisunzi Sacred Stone, 3 strokes struck. That they took a blacksmith hammer and struck it 3 strokes in honor of the Holy Trinity, claiming that the sparks that flew from it were the symbols of the fires of hell that the stone symbolized. And pieces of the stone were placed at the doors of the church, encouraging everyone of whatever status or condition to kick it as they passed. Now imagine what the sort of, you can think about some of that, and this is from an account of this historical figure, Dona Kempavito. I think it's just a very important figure there. If you've had other classes, and especially when we deal with this West Central African history and culture, we sort of can unpack this Congolese stuff here that I'm skipping around in the context of cosmology for our discussion, right? You can imagine the effect that's going to have, because this had been a person who had been, again, professing messianic visions, talking about that the king, the ones who had been priorly deposed, were going to be restored to their full glory, and that we wouldn't have this fractured empire that's now becoming in a state of civil war, encouraged by the captive trade. Because not everybody's in favor of this. You can imagine how this is going to create such violence because and tendencies, and then the guns are starting to come in too. I mean, it becomes very, very messy. But you have someone that's crying out that this is happening. I mean, with a loud voice, right? So what are they going to do to her, right? As the account will sort of detail, right? But why is this cosmology? Why is this important for us to think about cosmological belief systems and other things? Because many of the folks who were her followers become folks who get trapped up in the system network of the slave trade and brought over here as captives, as well as others who engage and interact with these prior sorts of meanings and understandings of culture. So you really have some interesting dynamics to sort of think about when you think about cosmology and spirit. And this is just one example, right, of this Bakongo. And this may reemphasize some of what I'm sort of stressing to you, right? The one reason why we think this is so important is because half of the people who come via the transatlantic captive trade come from those places like the Bakongo or Congo and Angola regions. That's a big one, right? And then we see these words show up. And this is what I was sort of getting at. I was intimating. I didn't want to sort of spell it entirely out when I was talking about Robert Johnson's son. Some is this sort of jazz blues connectivity with terms like funk and lakufi, right? Or there's another one here where you have this sort of interaction of what folks would call quote unquote goofer dust, kufwa, right? This makes an impact on Gullah culture. No, that what the folks are doing in Sierra Leone, they call themselves Gola, almost Goli, just spelled different or something. I mean, that's a big one too. So I don't want to sort of downplay that as the folks coming from those places, Senegambia region for sure. But this one plays because the very names and verbs stick on and hold on and have some meaning. Something like the kufi and funk. And some say, well, it's the fume, it's the French. That's the one where the funk comes from. I think that plays. But again, you got to look at this idea, right? Many of the people who come to the Southeast and into the Carolinas, they come from a range of different places, but they come also in a big number. You can see this big number here that plays. Right? It might have some impact on cultural ideas in the Americas, right? This is just one, right? We know too that right after, I mean, within the wake of her rebellion on the 1706 side and her being burned at the stake, Dona Kimpavita being burned at the stake, those captives end up here, and some of them end up right in this network around Charleston and other places, Spanish, and have Spanish Florida right there at the south, who already is an enemy of the English settlers, as you know, during this period. So they're already encouraging rebellion. They know each other to some degree from the prior interactions on the other side. And at the very least, the Spanish can speak Portuguese to them. And then they can make some kind of tell them, oh, let's leave. You don't want to stay with this. And then by the same token, these folks here start getting in the mode of, it's time to go, right? And it's interesting that it's Jesuits who are the ones on the Florida side who would have been encouraging some interaction when there were Jesuits and Franciscans and others and other schools of or missionaries, Catholic missionaries that were already there as well on the Congolese side. So you can see where they would have known how to have interacted with each other, right? And you can see where cosmology now is at play some here, I hope. Begin to think about the pathways of this at the very least, right? Because then we want to switch to another one. You say, well, now you didn't explain that good, but I hope you're grappling with and making sense of. Here you have one example, the Bakongo, and being able to sort of say what can I identify as an aspect of Bakongo cosmology, and then now let's look at Yoruba cosmology. And most of y'all know we say Yoruba, where we're talking about, right? What region? We're talking about West Africa then, no longer West Central. They're close, but not very close. Um, but this is also a big region. It's going to bring a large number of people into the Americas. It's not going to be 50%. I mean, 50% is huge, but this is going to bring a big number of people into the American sort of into this space, right? Not just North America. Right? I think that's where a lot of us get is confused. And we've been built out in this sort of idea that slavery and the impact of it all sort of played out in North America. But that's such a blind sort of perception because you leave out Brazil, Jamaica. I mean, really like the places that are English, the Jamaica, the Barbados, the Antigua, those other places early on in the game, they're right connected with the Atlantic seaboard. So a lot of people are coming that way. And that brought all kinds of folks, not to mention the prior, the French and Dutch and the Spanish who were bringing their own captives from within their own spaces and connections in Africa and bringing different peoples into the Americas. See, that's where the numbers start kicking in. You sort of have to rethink the way you sort of understand how all this maybe might have sort of worked because you couldn't captive cosmology as we've already talked about, right? Remember what Gates is already beginning to remind us of, and the idea of that marvelous figure, right? That initiate, right? That there's something there that couldn't be sort of captured, right? That's another reason that our sort of perception or inquiry with cosmology is important. And in the Yoruba sense, you got a different sort of structure, but maybe you can think about the ways they're similar, by the way that they're different. Again, you have this sort of gender neutral Odulumare as part of a structure, the Obatala, who represents the Lord of the White Cloth, sort of the molder or creator of natural entities, right? And one that I'm sure some of you may have heard of, Esau, or the sort of Legba figure, if you've heard that name before. Which shows up in the voodoo. We could talk about some of that just a little bit. He's the gatekeeper, both good and bad, right? In terms of and some folks maybe who are new to maybe sort of investigating sort of African spirit stuff would say, well, they're just picking this up in the air or something, or they're just making it up as they go, or just whatever. You know how this is what we've been taught. Oh, it's some little whatever. It's these cheesy horror film thing, whatever. But the Ifa the Ifa is this collection of sacred texts that it's pretty significant as a body or a volume of work in its own right. And the idea too that folks, we have written versions of this now, but that folks would have just known this from memory, right? And essentially pushed away, explored the option of writing it down and said no, we have to remember it. I mean, it's interesting. The way that sort of might be at work there in terms of thinking about cosmology. I mean, just for one thing, right? But Ifa is also a god name, but it also again is this connection of sacred texts, incantations, and medicines, right? Practiced by the Babalawo and the Ianifa, the priests and priestesses. And it's important to note that different deities and different other sorts of spiritual things can only occur to a priest or a priestess, right? It can be very much engaged with gender identity and other kinds of things. And within this space, there are very clear delineations of sort of power and other things. It doesn't all fit the sort of narrative that we maybe think it does. I would just add that in as well. The Western ones, maybe the one I'm referencing there, right? A 600 plus one natural powers, just kind of thing. With the Orisha and the Ajagun, right? The different sorts of belief systems, but something that can incorporate new ideas, certainly Christianity or Islam, as we see on the African side, as we see on the American side, as well as other facets and beliefs, traditional spirit practice, because you will see this sort of belief system that's really at the crux of things really show up in a couple of other cultures, right? For instance, the Edo people, right? Who are definitely distinct now. But you find instances or ideas of this, right? A manifest there, right? Amongst some of these names and some of these folks of these people, right? The Benin, the Oyo Ife, the Egba, Ijebu, right? I mean, you guys probably seen some of these. You heard of some of these Yoruba places, right? But not to leave out the Hausa and the Fulani, right? Who some people say they have the sort of Middle East origins, and then there's also just as some have rightly pointed out, that's not entirely applicable, right? Because I think people are trying to sort of make a draw to sort of things that are happening in Iran and in what will be it's Baghdad at the time, We're talking 10th, 11th century, and sort of this is a dynastic succession and other things within these states, which are, Hausa Bakwai is a Muslim sort of space, right? And I didn't necessarily want to go too deep into that, but we should note though that the origins of those people come from not necessarily the Middle East, and that's just an important sort of reminder there in thinking of cosmology and these other kinds of things. Um, and also something, of course, I specify in my Africa course as we unpack ethnicity and different folks and different peoples and identities, right? We look at sort of their movement, migration, interaction on the continent, right? Which oftentimes is the first one. And that doesn't mean that you don't have folks come from Asia, because you do. You don't have folks that come from Asia or Europe and other places, because you do, right? But it's this sort of early interaction of folks and peoples. The Fulani are the latent phase of that. So are the Hausa to that degree, to something like the Proto-Bush or Proto-Bantu sort of moving around of peoples, right, throughout the continent. Now you're getting into something, the Nilo-Saharan peoples, right, and antiquity. I mean, those are the early groups that are moving around. I know I'm getting into a conversation there, but just want to stress the context of this stuff, right? And yeah, it has meaning, because think about now people who are exited from this region and end up in the Americas. And a lot of people come from the by the Biafra region, right? Having known and interacted within spaces and places where this was a part of people's identity. These very discussions, right? So this type of thing. I mean, Ife, the dawn of ancient days, the dawn, the land of, I'm saying, sorry, ancient days, or the nucleus or the dawn of the universe, right? As described, right? So there's that Ife coming again, just reminding of us of its value in the context of this sort of thinking of cosmology and belief, right? And of course, the Edo people, right, being established by Ife kings early, and that's the sort of reason why we want to think about maybe some sort of broad strokes here. At least just to get us introduced to these different cultures and belief systems, right? And when we talk about expansive cultures, right? The Beni wall, Beni state, those walls themselves sort of hint at that. And any of the stuff that we want to look at more closely in class, to get a grapple with these peoples, we can do. But for the purposes of this lecture, we just want to understand that these are the sorts of peoples and spaces that are influential to the sort of larger idea of Yoruba, especially as it will exit out of Africa and come into contact with the Americas. What is that going to mean, right? This kind of thing, right? And even these kinds of accounts, and I'll just leave it with this one, around the city of Ife, right? Which again, as a city, as the same sort of God name, but also too as this name of these sacred texts, right? You see something there, interesting there, right? We're gonna look at cosmology a bit more when we look at some of these texts. When we look at the Wapele, you'll sort of see, oh, okay, some of this repeats itself, and you find it when we look at this story, which is from the Ifa text, right? We'll look at just a bit of that. But in the state of Ife around the 11th century, which had been this rival to Benin, right? This oil culture, which had been there, right? You had the same sort of political structure, the Alafen and the Oyo Mise, the king and the council of state, right? Who are early on a feature of this, right? Political systems, right? Going back to these early 11th century kinds of Oyo, an example, right? But by the time we get to the 18th century, these two groups are in tension over things, including the slave trade, right? Starting to cause some rifts, right? And one law says that if the Alafin does not agree or is at odds with the Oyomese, then one of the safeguards to having the Oyomese kill everybody and just say, I'm gonna run the show, is if y'all can't agree, especially to this point, he has to commit suicide, right? And this is in a couple of different accounts. There's a very, very large 19th century traditional history of Nigeria. I want to say the name is Samuel Crowther, but that may not be right. You can double check that, or you can ask me, I'll tell you. Really good history of Nigeria, right? You says, repeats this account. I mean, when I was in places, actually, I was just maybe in Benin, which is just right next door. I was asking people about this, and I was getting some verification on this account as well, and talking to other folks and looking at other traditions and talking to colleagues who are Nigerian, asking about the validity of this, right? And hearing, yeah, no, this goes back, the Alafin, right? This irreversible curse, as it was called, right? Which he said to European people, because they couldn't agree about the slave trade thing, right? European people will be taken as slaves all over the earth. Just as nobody men smash clay pots, nobody will be able to reverse my curse on the Yoruba people, right? So I just always think of this as an interesting kind of thing, right? I mean, you can look about what it means, or you can say, well, this might have had a large impact on people and the minds of people. I don't know this, but I mean, this is part of what we should know in the context of making sense of this experience, right? Of course, the fact that one, there's tension. Places like Hazabakwe and the jihads that are happening, and this is up in the same footprint and spaces where you have Boko Haram beginning to act out up in northern Nigeria. These same places started kicking on people further south, like the Oyo states, relative to their spirit practice and their need to interact better with or convert to Islam, right? And the tension that was caused. Now, and then in the midst of those jihads, some of those Muslims will sell, they'll say, because you're not Muslim, we get to sell you away. And many people are sold away as captives, right? Not to mention the tension between the varying Yoruba states, which is also a big one too. Benin and the Oyo were rivals, as we see there, right? So yeah, now when they fight, and if the Europeans or they have a European contact who are by this time who have made some inroads there with trading and other things with folks, then they can get the guns, then they can get those guns and use them to trade, and then pretty soon you got all these captives you can bring out as people to be sold away, right? What is something like the Alafin's Awole's irreversible course going to mean to them, right? So that kind of a thing. So this sort of stuff, but then it is in the same space. I don't want to overdo this much, but I want you to get a feel again for the culture and the maybe sort of the cosmology, the spirit practice, and maybe how it sort of is at work relative to some of the changes brought on by this sort of transatlantic contact. What will these people bring with them when they go? Right, this kind of a thing, right? And I mentioned the font. This is maybe the last one, and this one, and then I went one more, which is just the account we want to look at. But in the context of the Yoruba, and I only sort of stress some connectivity. They're not entirely the same, but you can see it's an Oyo vassal once again, right? So an offshoot of the Oyo is the establishment of the Dahomey, or it won't be Dahomey, right? It's going to be like some small state, Alada, Wida, Jakim, I think is how it's Jakin. Yeah, you got what will be the little Popo states that they call Little Popo and Grand Popo, right? That begin to emerge as these states around this region, right? And then together they're going to form Dahomey. By the 18th century, Alada and Wida are going to be principal ports of the slave trade. And then now for these folks, you got something interesting that will happen. Like you can't say this for the Oyo. The Oyo, the reason why they sort of kick back, or Benin, the Edo folks too, some of the other states at the coast, they were not, when the Portuguese and other people first arrived there and said, we want to trade for people, we're looking for gold, they were not very receptive. It took them a while. It didn't take them that long, but pretty soon that trade, it would open up. But it took a while, right? And when it did, there was hesitancy. There was always there. It took centuries for that to break down. Even though they would have a trading network, they would use intrigue and other things to facilitate that trade. They would say, well, because we know your enemy, and here's 1,000 guns to help you fight your enemy. If you bring your people, if your people fight war with them, then we'll take the captives of the war, right? And so then, yeah, that's okay. Now maybe we'll entertain that option, right? But and I only mention that in the context of those states to talk about Benin a little bit, or Dahomey a little bit, because theirs was a little bit different to some degree. In the sense that it really was a state that emerged in congruence with, maybe a stronger toho by the French and the Portuguese, later the English, to export people out of there, right? In those centuries that displaced, and that's the 18th century, as this one grows up into strength, the slave trade is growing up into strength. So what does that mean? That means that this little small little land here, which is called Dahomey, this brings a lot of people out, right? For such a small little place, they do very, very well and exporting folk up out of there, right? But it's, I mean, and once again, you can talk about this as a sort of place of, the outsiders label it the slave coast. I think that has something to do too with some of what will play out. But let's not let's not mince words to some degree. These become what grows up is a very, very strong and violent state that integrates the process of exporting or enslaving or let's say conquering. Let's say that. Let's not say slaving them, because the goal was to conquer and to just annihilate people. Then the captives they knew were money, so they could sell them away. Because they know they had ready folks at the coast. They were more engaged in the process of just the fighting of it. I mean, the host cigar, or Amazon, as people come to know them, these women warriors, earth mothers, were the truth, right? I mean, the French and the French accounts and the Portuguese accounts primarily, they didn't want to deal with them on the battlefield because they were very much an intense force to fight, right? They go back very, very early too in some examples, right? So that's one of these sorts of ideas, right? And there's other forms. I mean, not all of the folks who are part of the king's retinue are the personal guard and warriors. There were also people who are these act as sort of diplomats, a hosey. They have a sort of a different function altogether. So just to mention that too. But the belief system that these people coalesced around was voodoo. If we can put it in the sort of nutshell, sort of kind of a way, right? And we'll look at some examples of that as well. But one of the reasons I bring that up is just to remind us of the sort of way in which that's going to make its way into the Americas, right? And voodoo will show up very, very clearly. I mean, and our perceptions of this are strange. Maybe this is something we can talk about some in class. But our perceptions of this sort of practice are bizarre to the least. I mean, especially from what we get from sort of TV and other kinds of things. But what's really at work in these sort of cosmological practices and things, right? Well, and people would say, well, it was all the horror and the violence in these things. We saw it. We see it here in the case of the Dahomey. Function very much so in helping to captive and take and bring people out to the coast. I mean, to be sold away. As part of that process. I mean, but by the same token, in the Americas, it's gonna be what the Haitian rebels will use to kick the French out. Right? You've heard of the Haitian Revolution. You heard of Toussaint Louverture, right? These kinds of things, right? What does voodoo mean then? Right? That's the same. Well, it's not the same, but it's based on very similar cosmological structures. But again, you see how that's important now. Maybe sort of seek some of the features of how that will play, right? If you ever read Jordan Hurston's account of these meetings, the name of the book went right out of my head there just that fast. So when we're in class, I'll make sure to mention it as well, because she gives an account of it. The last ship, it's like the last slave ship. It's been on the news and other things. If you caught it, you might have heard something about it. But we'll take a look at that too, along with that clip if I can find it. So those kinds of things, right? When we want to think about cosmological structures, and we want to think about how they may be coming across the water and bringing themselves into the Americas. So we looked at the Bakongo one, right? We talked some about that. We looked at some examples in West Africa. We'll look at one other sort of structure in West Africa, and that's maybe one coming from the Savannah states or the forest, even from the Savannah states to the forest kingdoms, I guess across the Atlantic, right? And this one is affiliated with the Akan culture, right? If folks may have heard of the Akan people. There are other groups that make up these groups that are called the Akan, but within these cultures, let's say, which are situated right around what we would call, modern day Ghana. You can look at some maps on any of these, and in fact, I'm sure we will when we're in class to sort of help folks unpack these, some of this discussion here, right? This has its own other sort of belief system too, right? And the chief the priests play an interesting and sort of integral role in the sort of cosmological structure here. And I'm just going to use them as an example to sort of explore some aspects of this. This is again something in an African history class. If you're ever interested to take one of those, well, we unpack this in a lot of detail. We take our time and go through this, nice and slow. But for you guys, we just need to sort of get with an understanding of what sort of features of spirit and what that means when you say spirit, what that means, who maybe you might name somebody, what that means, maybe how you might organize resistance in the case of the Haitian, what that means, and maybe again, sort of features of music and performance and other kinds of things, maybe coming from what Congo may bring. These kinds of things. How does that show up, right? So we start with a very important story about the very, very famous priest. When I take trips to Africa, I usually go to Ghana. And one of the sort of instances when we go, if you go to Ghana, the one thing you will learn about is the Confanoche, which is this very important priest in the history of the Akans, right? And it was the name of this priest Confanoche, who caused the Afonakwa, or just the sword of the chief, right, to materialize from the heavens and to come down and land on the whole of the land of Adansi, right, which this is up right around Ghana, where they start to find big chunks of gold up here, right? And gold traders from the Western Sudan, remember there had been this gold system going on with the Sudanic stuff, Dinka, Mansa Musa, and these others who had, was considered the rich man, this 12th century. But these Mansa, remember that name, Kara Mansa will show up down here. That shows us some connectivity, right? But that these gold traders from the Western Sudan, places like Bego and Khan, will bring further down, closer to the sort of Atlantic network. They're coming out of the Sudanic, which had been beginning to wane, and now showing up in this Atlantic space, right? This is where you will see the Europeans at the coast, right? But that gold meant something, right? And so did who had control of that gold, right? So right away, people start talking about, well, the priest said that the sword landed. So just a minute now, because that meant that, well, the Adansi get it, one piece of it, but the Chira, who are another Akan people, say, hey, no, we got another piece of it too. They get the handle, the Afa Asini Kwa, right? Like, hey, hold up. Why do we just get the handle and you guys got the steel and the handle into the Chira, the Adansi get it, right? And just to tell you how important Adansi is all these people, all these groups who will become the Akan of such significance, right? Particularly the Ashanti. This is the birthplace of them, the Achem, the Abuakwa, and the Kotoku Achem. Both of them, right, come from here. The Fanti, if you ever heard of them, they come from here. So do the Akwamu, that's another group. And yes, the Ashanti, right? And see what happens is that first, then Shira goes at it with Adansi over the same issue that ultimately Ashanti will go at it with Shira, right? And it was over this gold. It was over gold, and that it could be traded in the Sudanic in the system that was starting to fade, but still has some networking for that gold to be traded, as well as the House of Bakwa in Nigeria and other places that could trade it there too, right? So you still got a little network of this gold that could bring in and around a system, right? But then at the Atlantic too, the Portuguese, the Dutch fighting each other, the folks from Denmark, yeah. Who else is in there early? The French and the English too, they'll show up, of course, but some of those guys, the Portuguese are there before anybody is. Then the Dutch come, and then the French and the English, and the other ones start showing up. French and English. The Danes are in there, I think, a little bit earlier too. But they want that gold. They want that gold, and they trading big for that gold, especially when now saying, because first it's just they wanted to trade for the gold, so people just came and wanted to buy and sell gold, and they would trade hard for that. They had to trade, whatever they had. So not always the weapons in those early instances, or not to such a high degree. I mean, people had to trade deer. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't come up there with no mess, because they would say, you know what, we can go take it to the Savannah network, Trans Savannah, which where they could trade them up with other things, other commodities. By this time, cocoa is very, very much a valuable commodity, right? It has qualities or not good dear gosh, I said cocoa, but what I meant was cola. Cola nut was a commodity too. It has the same qualities that we like cola for, and we talk about it is the same ones that people had because they put it in a bowl of water. People would drink it, and it would be served as a refreshment. To this day, serving someone a soft drink when they arrive is considered a sort of thing of hospitality in many places, especially when you go into a traditional space. I know I'm getting around and deep into this stuff, right, and talking about all these different peoples here from the Ashanti. We will unpack this some too, who lead up to the Ashanti, I should say. But that goal is going to play. The goal is big, right? Because everybody wants it and everybody's sort of coming up. But very soon that's going to be supplanted by, as you can imagine, by the time you get to the 18th century, it's the slaves, right? But again, you couldn't describe these states, although they're going to be heavy players. The Ashanti's going to bring a lot of folks out in the latent phase of that. I mean, you couldn't. The goal was what was really what was going on here initially, right? Quite a while, right? It booms up with the Ashanti when they come to power. And for a range of reasons, not just as they come, but they happen to be in that spot when the trade is mushroom. You can see, right? What kind of cosmological systems are they going to make their way across the water? What about the people who come from this region, right? But there's a few sort of key things that always sort of stick out, right? If you know the symbol there in the back there, the Giami, Adinkra symbol, right? It has real meaning, right? These Adinkra symbols have real value and importance because they specify elements of cosmology as part of sort of like morals and maxims, or within a design or within a symbol, a decipherable symbol that you could look at and recognize and say, oh, okay, this means this, right? And designed to represent a particular idea or belief. Think about the one that I'm sure everyone always knows, Sankofa. And by the way, we're going to be showing that film. It's coming up here during the semester. But Sankofa, remember to return to your back and get it, or return and get it, as people say, this type of sort of thing, right? Why am I sort of mentioning that one? Because that one, Giami there, that you see in the background means none other than God. Without accepting God, there's no other, right? Like there's nothing other than God, this kind of thing, which is an interesting sort of idea, because it connects to this sort of belief in this sort of supreme being, right? Connected to the humans through the earth, through the water, through the animals, and through other sort of spiritual intercessors like deities and other kinds of things, earth-based divinities, if you want to call them that. But within this space, the most sacred institution is the clan, lineage, and the family and ancestor. It plays a pivotal role, huge, right? People go to intersect and to call upon, or often to pay homage to, all of those and the above, those ancestors, those deities who may work through the anthropomorphic sort of earth, water, animal, or spiritual kinds of things. You would consult with them via suman or by obasan, right, or shrine, right. The term fetish is can be off-putting, and I think on the side of us on the West, we ought to be careful how we use it. I'm less concerned. I think sometimes Africans have taken it because they could imbibe it in as part of the verbalization or something. I think it had less to do with it, but for us, I think it's a bit more pejorative. I mean, I really have to say it that way. I don't know if that hits it on the nail. But the term fetish, if you think about what it means, it evokes some problematic kinds of things. But I don't think that it has the same impact when you talk about it in sort of a space where it's sort of openly identifiable and recognizable in the context of people's open practice and belief. Right. So they could say, oh, they said fetish. Well, it's okay. No, that doesn't really say what it is. Well, we already know what the traditional name of it is, so they can call it, peanut butter if they want. I don't think it matters in that way. But again, for us, the Portuguese, that's the first thing they did when they saw people doing it. That's fetish. That's their fetish. That's a fetish priest. Then everybody else who came behind them said the same thing. That's fetish. Pretty soon everything that you saw was fetish. And you can imagine how that became very stereotypical, especially when you equivocated that with demonism or dark magic or all this other kind of stuff. People were very condemning of the local beliefs as they were coming in to take people away. And again, that same dynamic that we talked about with the Bakongo, right, where you had to break down that big system, that big, huge spiritual system that maybe helped, like the Lasunzi stone in that example. You had to break something down so that you could sort of hopefully just scatter the political system, make it so unstable that now all you got to do is just sort of catch. And I'm not saying this was so colluded, but to some degrees it was in some instances. And believe me, we can point some of those out if we have to. Um, but this kind of thing. But the Akomfatu don't leave that out. Who he or she acts as the interpreter or mouthpiece of a guardian spirit of a nation, town, or family. That Akomfo Obayifo, right? Same. But it's the one who works in practice and in the dark, and they're not against each other. And I think too, even the way I'm structuring it here sort of suggests that it's the Okomfo versus the Obayifo, and they're like battling each other. But nah, it's not necessarily like that. They're within the same sort of, they intersect in the strata. I think the sort of the way the Legba or Asu spirit sort of functions in the elements of a Yoruba cosmology, right? It's a good and a bad. They're just the barometers of this sort of space sometimes, the interpreter, the mouthpiece, right? Oftentimes, right? So this type of thing. But yeah, you see interesting kinds of things that happens politically. One of them being the sort of delineation of political and spirit power, and something that is going to play itself out into the Ashanti. And so then in the context of that, we want to see if that idea of a separated system of spirit and political power, when people organize, will manifest itself in the Americas, right? And we see that, right? We'll talk about how here as we get sort of close to the wrapping of this up. Again, this is just elements of this sort of narrative on the Akan side, particularly how the Ashanti sort of figure in there. I introduced the Konfanoche spirit, this priest, this very, very famous priest who's part mythical, part real, who's all over everything. He has a real historical footprint. I wouldn't say that he does not, but also too, there's no way the guy could have been around with the Adansi when they were fighting Denchira, and then all of a sudden he showed up too for the Ashanti. And then I think people start saying one time, I think they saw him in the 20th century somewhere. So he has that sort of spiritual presence and I like that idea of his sort of liminality. Is that a word? Can I throw that one out there? I like that about just because you can't nail him down, and the West always, and this not. I don't know, just people want to put something in a space and say this. Sometimes it's not necessarily what's that work there. So, but anyways, you have this priest. He plays an important role. The Shanti is it's a huge state. It's based on gold. I mean, these are renderings from drawings of the time. I mean, that someone sat down and drawn. So you can see an organized, structured state here, right? And people always want to get on the facets and features of this that were about enslavement and exploitation and violence and other things. And those things figure in here as well. I'm not going to say that they don't. But I see the dynamism of this, right? Particularly and even more so see how those kinds of things are going to influence the cosmological ideas of people who will be exited from these places, right? So you do have a state that's going to be in gold, agricultural products, and slaves, especially as it gets its sort of footprint and toehold over the coastal cities. Once the Ashanti can control Accra and then Cape Coast on the other side. I mean, these are huge castles where people had sometimes exited out people, but sometimes the local states were resistant to that exiting of peoples. But once the Ashanti could control them, because they knew that the British and the French and pretty soon the Danes are going to sell out, but they have been there. The Portuguese still were there. We're still buying up people like crazy. They're like, no problem. We could sell them at Accra. We could sell them at Cape Coast. And then to fight the Fanti to get Cape Coast, no problem. To fight the Ga and to fight the Achem and other people to get Accra, no problem, right? And then you bring some of that into the space, right? But I guess, again, I want to sort of get us thinking around the dynamism of these places, right? It's not entirely the basis and the identity of these people are not entirely about the enslavement and the capturing of people. And I think we have to see them outside of this sort of notion to some degree, right? Ourselves and these cosmologies, how they may have been influential, because they're not created in spaces when slavery is the thing, right? And the captive trade is at its high point. Cosmologies aren't created in those moments, right? They come into contact with those moments. that's the sort of thing I think is really important to sort of think about, especially when we think about how people maybe, what aspects of cosmology might show up in the Americas, right? This kind of thing, right? But you got this guy, he's a spirit priest. I'm not going to keep wearing you down with it, but I just want you to see who Confinoche is and understand that he's this very important priest who will call down the golden stool. It'll be the beginning of the Ashanti Empire that will emerge in 1701. And we have to also sort of throw in here too that priests at some points offer safe haven to people who are trying to run away from being captured and enslaved. That's an important one. And if you dig deeper into Confinoche's narrative, some of that comes out too. So you got this priestly figure who's part devoid of historical intentionality. It means that he could sometimes just be placed in there where people thought he should be go, right? But also too, he had these sort of philosophical meanings within a cosmological belief. It's within its own right, and you want to explore those because again, those are the things that you can't. I don't want to bind that to slavery and captive trade and this. I want to look at that as a feature of as a dynamism of a culture of a cosmology that will come into contact with some of these horrible moments like slavery, right, and war, quite a bit, right? Because us, how do they? I mean, they're going to do some interesting things. Some interesting things are going to start happening, right? Remember our Malaya with the Congo, Bakongo. That will be the sort of mile we can link with a little bit. And then the Kung Fu and the Obe, we could sort of plug them in just a little bit, right? There are others, but these are just our ones that we've been looking at. So I'm just using them sort of just to remind you, right? You could put hoodoo or voodoo in there if you want to throw that in there too, because they're sort of ideations of folk belief, folk cultural practice, right? That become these sort of creolized African practices, right? This is what we know about. If you think about, some people say, well, Obe or Obai or how, they get different names for it. The Mayo today is more like I almost want to call it the Rasta. I'm gonna stop short of that, but it's in that space. It's a little bit closer to that space because there's more progressions that the Mayo had to go through vis-a-vis its intersections with this time Christianity, not with the Catholics over here in West Central Africa, but this time maybe with the Protestant stuff. That's going to come out, and then from there you're going to get this sort of stuff that will be pronunciations that include, the Rasta's talking about back to the motherland, and we live in Babylon. We need to get back to our homeland. This type of thing, But that I could see the Maya as a root of that, right? The Obe, if you know about that, you may have heard of it. The Kung Fu will play not so much in our world anymore. But in the 18th and 19th century, you better not have, if you was in Jamaica talking about Kung Fu, I know Kung Fu, you talking about somebody who's a priest who was that was a Kung Fu. Oh, that's dangerous talk. That's dangerous talk. And we don't, we will delve in it because we'll look at the Jamaican example. You're going to see that Kung Fu is one of the leaders of the Maroon rebellions. And guess what the Maroons do when it comes to dealing with the issue of slavery? Well, you'll see. But they sort of tear at the shreds. They sort of tear up the slavocracies, right? The British have to sue for peace because these guys are going and ladies too work together. Oftentimes use ambuscade, covering themselves up with trees and bushes. They're sneaking out. They're jacking people up in the mountains of Jamaica and liberating people too at the same time for a while. And they're led by Kung Fu. It's the Kung Fu priests and the Obe practitioners who will guide those actions and efforts. All right. So that's what I mean. So again, maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but if you think about the ways that the Akan culture that we just talked about, the Igbo culture, again, that we sort of mentioned in the context of the Yoruba, right? And the Gambia, Senegambia, right? We'll talk about them just more in a second here, but we're just introducing them here some now, right? Those people who came as captives from those places in South Carolina were able to bridge that gulf between them and then look over at the people who are coming from West Central Africa. How can all these people get together and then also interact with those from the other side who are far, far away? It may have had less interaction. Some people would argue that West Central Africa has no sort of correlation to West Africa. I would have to 100% disagree because all you need is Cameroon there to remind you and some of the extensions of sort of the expansion of these sort of the states out of the House of Akwa and other places that do this network. Because I mean, just think how big Nigeria is. Nigeria is huge. Anyway, I'm getting off track, but they knew each other on the other side too. Don't think they didn't, but meeting here could amp that up times 10. So you could have moments where folks were like, well, how did I even know or intersect with you at all? I don't know anything about you. So all I have is animosity towards you. I don't like you, right? But what could break that down, right? Well, it's this kind of thing. Because how are you going to collude together to figure out how to respond or resist to react to certain things, right? And this is where some of this sort of rhetoric, you got to be careful. Because which one would see this as a witch? Which one would see this as the conjure? The one who's being sort of, I mean, well, look at what they say that they do. You tell me. If you keep away from them, they sure can't hurt you. So that's reminding you of something. So some of you probably already figured it out, but not all the way. Some have magic power, what come to them from way back in Africa. My mother used to tell me about slaves just brung over from Africa would have the magic power. There was a magic pass they would pass to others. Now that's got to mean something, right? And that's from, if you ever heard of the, Writers Project, when people went out and collected these slave narratives in the 1930s and early part, 30s and 40s, right? So that late in the remembrance, people are talking about how folks came from these places, and that the spirit practice was a thing that they can imbibe themselves with to form ways of resisting and to communicate with other folks across maybe the sort of cosmological divide that maybe separated West and West Central Africa in some moments, right? And something like how you gonna get to a place where you can cross the divide, right? Where you gotta start hitting that. Like, look at this old dude, man. But you know what it is. You already know. It's the drum, right? Drum is powerful, right? And I mean, in this instance, that's sort of why I sort of slowed back on the Senegambia. I just wanted to just sort of pull back here so we can sort of see that in its own right, and how that will also figure into these sort of African sort of folk cultures, right? Djembe, the talking drum, right? Everyone gather together, right? Right? And this takes us back into deep. We could end up stepping back again, back to those Mansa Musa, right? Wealthiest person of the Mali Empire, right? Considered the wealthiest man of all time, right? Go ahead, we can Google the name. Remind me if you want to Google the name. Let me write that down too, because wealthiest of all, man, just all types of money, and that just takes us back to this era and this time of empire, right? And these griots who could use this drum as a way to tell the history and the narrative of these great kings, right? The glory of the king was embodied in the griot. Now you see the griot, you go to Mali or somewhere today, he might be outside playing, or someone who represents that, still that caste or system or belief system might be still playing a little bit. You could give them some money and they might take it, or they do open performances. But back in the day, man, hey, I mean, it's a serious thing, right? It's a serious thing. And one of those short clips we look at, that we looked at last week there, sort of gives us in the feel of the energy that the griot could bring to the space and the place by playing this music and singing of the glory of the kings, folks like Mansa Musa and others, right? So there was always that connection, and that's why that talking drum and also the performance tradition of the griot could play such a close sort of connection. And in addition to being connected to the Sahel and the Sudanic systems, and Pac Savannah and the Islamism and other things, because there certainly are features here that are at work, right? You can see again, sort of my approach to sort of separating this out some, just to sort of address this in the context in its own right as well. All those things are going to be features of the identities that people are going to come out of these places with, especially the Senegambia region, and bring into the Americas. Just from everything as practical as knowing how to grow grain and rice and other things in Africa. Why do you think it was that when people say, hey, the best people you can get are from the Gold Coast or from the Senegambia? Why? Because when you bring them over here as captives, you just ask what you did. You call them slaves. You might say, I whipped him down. I took his name away from him and all that. You probably did do all that old garbage. But in the end, a lot of times you had skilled laborers who knew that land and knew how to work that land and knew, oh, we're talking about agriculture. And I mean in terms of the zone, tropical zone. I mean, no, that they were, knew the land. But they knew the tropic land. They knew that. They knew how to grow in that sort of climate. So they already knew what it took. So it wasn't like they were the ones who were teaching you. You see what I mean? So from something as practical as that kind of agricultural sort of expertise that people knew, all the way up through griots who could tell the traditions of kings, warriors, marabout, who were considered these sort of Muslim scholars who come from the Senegal, other folks, right? Will those things come across the water, right? So that kind of thing, right? And even from some of the other places, right? What you find are some, I'm sorry, what you find are some interesting ideas of the way that that talking drum and that long drum and that talking horn could really sort of be, right? Something, right? And you could find it prior to the captive exchange. There were in Africa already sort of the Sudanic states, the coastal states like the Akan and the Fon, that had some interactions. Not all good, but there's some cultural things that affiliated them. They grew from each other. They didn't grow to be separate states. The Fon would grow to fight the Oyo. They would fight the Oyo, but in the early on, they were an extension of that state. It's not unlike what you see in other places, as you can imagine. Right? We just want to see that sort of contextual stuff at work, but it doesn't mean they don't share culture. Same again. Same again, right? Can enemies share the same culture? Right. I don't know why I'm laughing at that, but something about that makes me laugh because I just think, wow. I mean, we have enemies sometimes not right next door to each other. We share the same culture, don't we? So maybe that's sort of, I'm laughing because of the maybe sort of, that's something to consider, I suppose. But the violent means that the people who identify with and represent or reflect upon the same sorts of cultural ideas. I mean, can still find sort of space to resist and not get along. Sometimes they can. They can too. But that kind of a thing. So where are we going with all this? What are some of the takeaways we want to sort of keep, right? And I know this is a lot, and it's okay because I want you to take these lectures in as you need to. There will be on a bit of a time constraint as we've discussed, but digest some of this because it'll help you make sense of this cosmological stuff. And you want to be thinking and writing about the context of this when you're putting together these papers that we'll be working on. Okay. So like for instance, like you want to take this away. You want to take this away. This page you want to remember, right? I mean, you might have to go back up and listen to some of the exciting prior talk. But if you've heard most of this or journeyed this far, this is a key, right? This is the key. This is what you want to take as take away, right? And unpacking this in the context of some of the resources that we'll look at, some of the assignment materials that we'll discuss, and we'll unpack this in class some as well, right? But these are Campo and these are Baifo. They're from the Akan or tree-speaking people who already have familiarity with the oath-making allegiance to shrines, priests that made a king, right? That were there to celebrate the birth, a death, a war, annual celebration, naming ceremonies, anything, So you had those priests that were in that role, right? And the Kikango or Bakongo side, the Mayala, all right, or that Malewa, that one who rules, right, with that spirit voice, right? The voice that's inculcated with the spirit and the destiny and the cosmic energy of a people, right? The Mujaji, right? 17th to 19th century female dynasty of members who were venerated as rainmakers, right? Katomi priests, right? And the Ganga Miranda. This is, again, who are we talking about? Our Donna Kempavita, right? So what am I getting at just with those sort of three primary examples? Something like Kung Fu Men, Obe Men, Mayo Men, right? We're going to see them at work. You're going to see them. This is the basis for what they're doing when they start kicking back at slavery, resisting to slavery. When people from these regions come as captives, This is these are many of these cosmological our mechanisms that people are drawing on to resist, as well as to sustain. It's not all about that. Think about something like the naming ceremonies, Kofi, Kwame, Abena, Quadro. Where those names come from, Kojo, where those names come from, right? They go back to very, very early kinds of things. So not always as a form of resistance, but we know that a name can be a form of resistance too. So this sort of stuff, right? But people could organize around those things. And yet a Maoism will connect to the Rastafarianism and the Kumina and to the roots Wege and to the pop music language, which stylistically absorbed into various genres of global electronic popular music. So we got some root here. We got something that becomes sort of very, very important. Yes, we're talking about the griot, we're talking about the talking drum, we're talking about the talking horn, and then the context of and reactiveness of these Sudanic jihads, and then just sort of the space we talked about there in general. What Robert Farris Thomas calls all this together, songs and dances of social illusion and suspended patterning. These constructs convey dramatic African influence in visual art, dance, and music. And the genesis is the cosmological sort of spirit things. They're the genesis for what folks will do. Of course, that includes aesthetic thing, right? Think of it like this way. Just go back to, again, something we talked about in the first lecture there, which was around Henry Louis Gates's jig, right? Remember, we talked about that. The marvelous figure, right? A dark jig is watching with a great length of hair. His teeth are pointed and his intentions are sharp. He glared at me with what I could not tell may have been eyes of live coals, right? That's from Gates's thing, right? Henry Louis Gates, the marvelous initiate who emerged at the western pole of the Middle Passage. The initiate survived, dreams intact, but dreams are muzzled to the shores. Well, what are those last kinds of things? And we can maybe get into them in class some, sort of get us to when we think about Afro-cosmology, when we think about what it may mean and how it might impact some things. So this is the importance of that. Some of the readings and other sort of components we'll look at, video and otherwise, will help to help us further investigate that. All right.